third live stream with How to DAO and Network State Connect. This time we actually will be talking mostly about Network State Connect with its co-founder Matt here. So welcome, Matt. What get you started with Network State Connect?
Well, what got me started? I was in a server that Balaji started when he was writing the Network State book. This would have been, I think, around 2021. And that server was called 1729. And I could tell you more about it, but basically, it was a very formative experience. And I came away from being in all these lectures when he was explaining it to people as he was writing the book, and like that global community that was formed around that. I came away from that experience just thinking this would be something I'd like a lot more people to have access to because it was a closed server. And I also wanted to help spur on the network state movement. And so that's how we got it started.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, basically Balaji started with this network state term and the movement, and there is a book. I believe it's networkstate.com, so it's available for everyone. And you got there early, so you were actually part of writing a book. What else was going on in the server? Like, how was the process actually writing a book about something which is kind of in one person head?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that I was part of writing the book, certainly. I mean, it was all in Balaji's head. But what it was the early days of the server before I got there, Balaji was like practicing bounty systems. That's my understanding. He would like create a task and then do bounties. And so all these people were playing with that and then started a Discord server. And then Balaji's next thing became wanting to write a book on network states, which is just kind of, we can get into what that is, but just like this evolution of society now that we have the internet, now that we have Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and all these different things, where is society going? So he wanted to write this book. And then I came in right when he started doing these lectures in VR once a week. And I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and it was global. And so the times were really bizarre. Like in Austin, Texas, it was like 11 p.m. or midnight or something when he would do these VR lectures on, I believe it was Wednesdays. And so we would log in, and Balaji would have this big presentation screen behind him in this VR room. And there were about 125 of us at any given time inside this room. And we'd have like these floating heads with our name above us. And it would actually have our Twitter name above us. It was connected with Twitter. And you got to know other people in the server. And so you'd kind of float around and see your buddies. And then Balaji would start talking. He would talk for an hour. And generally, it would be like a concept that would be finding its way into the book as a chapter. So he would, kind of come up with something like network state defense or something, or NYT BTC CCP, just concept of like a triumvirate of like power where it's like CCP, New York Times, and Bitcoin. With that's a chapter in the book. And so he would chew through these ideas in the lecture, and then we would go into small groups, into breakouts, usually by region, and discuss those different things. And that helped form connections as well. There's something about that VR experience too, is spatially really fascinating. It was really community building. And then the rest of the week, we would talk about these different issues and then talk about current events and then sense make globally. And I thought that was really fascinating because people would be telling you about things that are happening in their region and they'd be telling you firsthand. And usually they were pretty intelligent people. And so that process went on for about 6 months. And after about 6 months of that, it was 20 lectures. Balaji got busy writing the book, spent 6 months doing that. And then after the book came out, we all just kind of like celebrated and talked about it. And then Balaji's next big thing was the network school. And so that's what he's currently doing.
That's
Hey
super
Matt,
cool.
it's a fascinating journey how this came about. Obviously, you were personally attracted to this way of thinking and viewing the world. How does that connect to your previous experiences and beliefs that you thought that this philosophy of the network state would be interesting to you?
I mean, I'm a libertarian. I follow closely the idea of the fourth turning. For people who don't know about the fourth turning, it's a book, and it's about how There are 4 distinct cycles that take place in the American economy. It might be visible in other economies, but they focus on the American economy. And basically, it's like the fourth turning is like the economic equivalent of a winter. And it's this idea that your institutions will probably experience a lot of decay. And this is a natural form, it's a natural process rather, where they'll perform worse, they'll be kind of wasteful, they might no longer achieve their mission, but many of them have been around for 80 years or more, and so they naturally have to kind of degrade, and then that's the precursor for them updating into the next kind of evolution of what they're going to be, usually based on new technologies, right? So it's like when we vote or when we watch television or the ways that our institutions function, they're functioning in a pre-internet era. Like all these things are distinctly pre-internet. They're not transparent to us. And so that's part of the reason that they're just sort of falling apart, right? Is that they're based on an operating system that doesn't really even exist much in the world anymore, right? It's famous how old the like programming languages are that the government systems are written in and stuff like that. Like people are dying off that the last people are dying off that even know how to write in some of these programming languages, right? The essential government systems are built on. And so I kind of had this pre-existing understanding or belief that there was going to be a big evolution in the way that society functioned, in the way that our institutions would, be legible to us. In other words, like how can we know what they're doing? How can we know that they're achieving what they're supposed to achieve? And how do we actually give feedback on these different things in a democracy? And just the ability for them to be much more efficient. If we were to just look at them with a fresh perspective, all these institutions like healthcare could probably literally be 1/10 of the cost if we just focus on efficiency rather than, channeling revenue to certain parties, that lobby. If we were really like, we're going to do this in an efficient way and we're going to use innovation as hard as we can, we literally could probably drive the cost down to 1/10 of their current cost in a decade. But that's not the goal, right? But so eventually systems that don't have that as the goal will lose out to new systems where that is the goal, where efficiency is the goal and being more effective is the goal. So societies and organizations that are built in this new image on the internet, right, of the internet, let's say, this networked image where information transfers, immediately and two-way rather than one-way, and sense making is just like much more powerful, and your ability to express preferences as a group is much more powerful. When all these things are kind of unleashed and then society is built in that model, it's going to outcompete the previous models. So that was a prior I had before network state, was even a concept that I was aware of. And then the network state became like a way to think about that because it was overtly like the evolution of society from the old set of institutions into the new set of institutions. How do we use technology to build these things? And so that's why I got excited about it. It was kind of like, it was kind of the key to my lock, right? I had this like, we need to innovate, we need to evolve societally, but how are we going to do it? And it's not an easy conversation to have. Not a lot of people are thinking along those lines. And so Balaji was able to not only like highlight a lot of the different ways of thinking about it, but then attract a lot of really, really smart people to think about it. And so that's why I got excited when he started doing it.
Awesome. Yeah, I believe you have also spent quite some time working with, for example, local government, right? So you know what government does in places like the US. Has that inspired your work or your beliefs in any way?
I mean, it's inspired my work and my beliefs. So I do work. I have a company called Civic Trust, and we do something called participatory budgeting, where we help local governments run engagement campaigns where they collect ideas for how to spend the public funds, and then they allow the population to vote on projects for those public funds that they came up with. So the public gives ideas and then votes on those ideas, and then that's how a certain amount of tax dollars are given out. We just did it with $1 million in Denver. Denver's preparing to do it with $2 million next year. I did it in New York we had $40 million that we were doing. That was very exciting, good times. So that's government innovation. So yeah, I mean, I think about government innovation at the local level and in person. And I do have contact with these different agencies that would be in charge of scoping projects that people come up with and installing projects, et cetera. And I mean, it's influenced my thinking in that, you know, a lot of our allies in this system are already inside of government. A lot of people join government because they want to innovate and they want to provide services and they want to help people. That's why they got involved in this kind of like, you know, almost servant leadership thing, you know, where they're like, we're going to like help bring these changes about. And then they find themselves stuck in a bureaucracy that is just like so labyrinthian, right? They get inside and it's just like, how do I affect change? And when you deal with a bureaucrat who's, you know, middle-aged and they've been in the system for 2 to 3 decades and they just seem like they've been ground down, a lot of times that, you know, the reason that our institutions are populated with people like that is because they weren't able to affect change. The institution wasn't really listening to them. And so these people have a desire to innovate their own institutions. People inside, especially millennials, you have to target certain people, but people inside, they want to innovate it and they want to innovate it from the inside. So I think people too often, as you know, as a libertarian, people too often think of the government as bad or government as the enemy or bureaucrats as bad categorically, or that's all incorrect. If you work with those people, your allies are inside the system as well, and you have to work with them to help to create that change. And I think that's really the way to do it. So I have a very nuanced view on the relationship between network states, which can be started completely sovereign in a sovereign way and autonomous, to local governments, which are obviously connected to, you know, Westphalian nation states, right? Local government is just like a form of that kind of government. I don't think that they're exclusive. I think it's dynamic in that network states help create innovations, and then you can introduce those into certain systems in the nation state, usually the local government, because those are easier to affect. And then it'll be a feedback loop of innovation where like innovations happen on the outside at the network state, and then they're adopted in the local government. One just quick example of that is you're seeing Bitcoin is being suggested on state treasuries now in Florida and several other places. Right. And so it's like now this innovation that came from completely outside the system is going to start to improve the existing system itself. So I think these things do affect each other in a positive way.
So to summarize it, you're not so much anti-government as you are anti-bureaucracy.
I'm just anti-inefficiency. If you have a system that doesn't listen to its constituents, that doesn't have a proper feedback loop, that isn't transparent, it won't innovate, right? I'm anti, I guess you could say sort of monopoly. I'm very anti-regulatory capture, this idea that certain entities are going to be able to construct, so like big companies can write the regulation for their own industries that prevent people from competing with them. Crony capitalism, in other words. I'm very, very against that because that's the kind of thing that just like destroys the ability of the market to actually like function for people. And so, yeah, that's how I'd put it.
Cool.
So just like maybe to get a little back, because some of the listeners probably don't even know or never heard about network state, like what would be the simplest definition you can think of, like what is actually a network state?
So if you go to networkstate.com or ns.com, I think is another one that goes to the same place, you can find the book. And it's all there on PDF for free. And they have a network state in a sentence, a paragraph, an essay, an image. He has all these like really simple ways of understanding it. I'll read you the sentence and we can break it apart a little bit if we want. But a network state is a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. So that's a big sentence. There's a lot to unpack. I mean, it's sort of, frames like a 400 plus page book, right? But starts online, a group of people that start online, they're able to act collectively, like through, that's one of the reasons that we're doing governance, right? The reason we're having this podcast is because you guys do DAOs, and so we're studying DAOs and DAO governments, right? Governance. So it's an online community that can do collective action, but then what's novel is that they start to buy territory around the world or just somewhere in the world, and then hopefully get diplomatic recognition. So from the UN. And that sounds really sci-fi, and maybe that'll take 20 or 30 years to take place, but I think that kind of innovation is very possible. I think there's probably, the way I see it, just to put it out there, is something called a special economic zone. A lot of people who live in developed nations aren't very familiar, but if you're in developing nations, they're common, where it's an area that, for example, when I lived in Costa Rica, I would see these. I had a friend who worked at Amazon in Costa Rica, and Amazon was in Costa Rica, and also Intel and HP and various other modern multinational companies were in Costa Rica because they created a special economic zone, which was a geography where their red tape and their really, basically like poor regulatory environment was swept aside. And they just said, okay, multinational companies, if you come in here, we're going to not mess with you. We want you to educate our people. We want you to pay our people. We want, we want you to help our economy. So we're not going to harass you with the regulations that we do with our own citizens, which is why we're poor, right? Like a lot of the reasons the developing world is poor is because of really poor regulations. So these special economic zones, they're all over the world. There's hundreds of them on, pretty much every continent total. And so I think that you can eventually get a country to agree to let people have some sovereignty in their territory for the benefit of them coming in and stimulating their economy the same way that a special economic zone does. And so I don't think it's very far-fetched. That's what a network state is. But really what we're focused on right now is, at the beginning, it's the online community. It's people collaborating online and then building things together online and getting more sophisticated at that.
Yeah, but that's kind of what you said, like a little bit ago. Like there is this like government and there is this network state, and the network state innovate, so it can be the kind of economical zones within the nation state, and they will just like basically get the innovation into the nation state, and then they use it, kind of stuff. So that, is it something like how you feel like it will play out? Like the nation state will kind of live, the network states will kind of live within the nation states and help them to become better?
That's a great question. I think there will be some of that. I think ultimately network states, should they succeed, they will be autonomous. They will be sovereign from nation states because they will be able to exist among various territories like an archipelago. They will be inside various countries, and then they will have treaties and agreements that give them sovereign rights the same way a nation state would have sovereign rights. So they'd be viewed as peers to nation states. That'll eventually happen. But I think being around them will be very good for nation states. It's sort of like Singapore, right? It's like you take a piece of land and then you innovate on its regulatory environment vastly, and then it just gets way wealthier than its neighbors, right? Hong Kong's another example. There's a lot of examples if you look into it. It's like everything is the same except for the regulatory environment, but the population is the same, the geography is the same, the resources are the same. But the regulatory environment is so good that it just gets super wealthy and developed, right? And so we know that that's possible. We have examples around the world that that's possible. South Korea and North Korea, right? And so I think network states will be like that for the nation state. Like they will outperform them and then provide examples of ways that they can improve. And certain nation states will benefit from it more than others. It depends on how open they are to innovation, to listening, Many will be left behind probably in the short term.
And so do you see also some, like, now you mentioned a couple like nation states which were successful with their regulation, like Singapore, South Korea and stuff, but do you see also like network state itself, some like maybe early network states which are kind of becoming successful, or maybe people should read more about them? Like, are they exist, or is it just the book?
Well, so there's like 7 stages to an online community becoming a network state, according to the book. And the book is just like a first stab at the concept. And so it's certainly not like an orthodoxy, but it gives you some frameworks to think through it. So there's a lot of early stages. There's a lot of network states that are in the early stages. Considering that diplomatic recognition or territory are the final stages, No, we're not there yet. There are people trying, like there's something called Praxis. They're trying to buy a city in the Med, and they want to buy land in the Med, create a special economic zone. There's a great video on this at the 2024 Network State, no, 2024, 2023, might have been 2023. But in any case, the Network State Conference, you can look up Praxis. Dryden Brown, the guy who runs it, gives a presentation on that. And what they're doing is they're trying to buy a large piece of territory from probably more developing nation around the Med. And then they've attracted a lot of capital from people who want a favorable regulatory jurisdiction to do business in, right? In other words, they want to be able to shape their regulatory environment rather than just be at the mercy of like Turkey or Croatia. I guess Turkey probably isn't on the Med. I'm not good with that geography, but whatever. Like being under the jurisdiction of a nation state that is, probably extremely hard to affect the regulations of. They want, Praxis to make this deal with that host nation. That host nation is going to receive a ton of jobs and a ton of money that capital's been attracted, and then that capital is interested in a novel regulatory environment for themselves. So Praxis is trying to host that. That's the one that's furthest along. There's also another one, actually, now that you ask, Prospera, right, in Honduras. So there's an island called Roatan in Honduras, and there's a private city on the island called Prospera. And that's been running for well over a decade. And it's a similar concept. Like they have a special jurisdiction inside of Honduras. And so it's a special regulatory environment. And so these things are being tried, but there's not very many that have that full stack. And I don't think there's any that have gone all the way yet.
Yeah, I've read about Prospera that the Honduran government is now trying to backtrack on the special economic zone, and is being portrayed as, these crypto bros, let's say, were all for building their ideal society free from government, but they basically bought the land from a authoritarian regime. And now that a new government, which is actually more democratic, gets into place and wants to rescind the treaty, the crypto guys start suing Honduras. Now, I don't know the fine details of this, but obviously this can be one of the risks of building a completely novel place. Have you heard about that story?
Yeah, and I don't know enough about it to weigh in on who's the villain at this point. I know that I'm very in favor of Prospera's attempts at creating this. It's just been exciting for the space. But it's so early still, right? And so the fact that we had one private city, it functioned for a long time with autonomy. It's in a fight right now with the government. I don't know the latest, but I think that it's, there's a chance that it'll maintain its special economic status. I think that when we're dealing with the developing world, these are the kind of hazards that we have to learn from, right? And the developing world it's a double-edged sword, because that's who can benefit the most from the development, who can benefit most from the innovation, but it's also sometimes the least stable governments. And so we'll learn from it and move forward.
Right. What do you think is what are the bigger ideals that network states can build towards, right? Because in this whole struggle, which is going to take a lot of work and a lot of capital, what will that eventually prove? Is that a low regulatory environment, and going back to your libertarian ideals, that those actually produce more wealth? Is it that we can give more freedom and autonomy to people with certain interests and preferences that come together to form their own nation, right? So it's basically about autonomy. In what sense does this bring humanity any further along its progressive path?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, man. It's modularity, it's customization, it's the ability to get together with 10,000 other people online and starting to form an economy and having the promise of being able to live in a jurisdiction that agrees with your values, right? And so there's a great economic argument. There's a great social argument. In the United States, a lot of so we have what's called federalism, right? And the idea being that it's like states' rights. Each of the states should be very distinct in terms of regulation from the federal government. When we were set up, we didn't even have a federal income tax. It was the federal government was very small and not subordinate to the states, but the states were very powerful by comparison to today, right? In terms of that relationship, the states were receiving probably more tax dollars and kind of providing more services and stuff. And so by comparison, right? Because now everything is federal, right? Like you have federal healthcare and the federal government takes in all this money and then redistributes it to the states and redistributes it to all these institutions inside of the states. And so that idea, I think, was correct. Of you want people to live in states, in areas where that environment matches your values, right? And within that, so just to kind of give an example that's a little bit maybe controversial, is like I'm a libertarian, which is considered the opposite of socialist, but like I'm very excited for socialists, for technological socialists to start socialist network states or socialist environments, because I think it's a great experiment. I think the distribution of common resources, if you can have a really transparent environment and you can have people who are very interested in staying up to date on these things and then distributing the stuff, like that's a totally valid experiment. Now you can't do it at the global level. If you have global socialism, like in China or in Russia or whatever, for like it'll destroy those social systems. But if you have localized socialized systems, I think that's a perfectly valid experiment and I'm in favor of it. And so that's a perfect example, by the way, Gideon, of like it's an economic, but it's also values based. These experiments need to take place, right? So I think network states will facilitate that, the ability of groups to get together and do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you on that, Matt. Like, you know, the big socialist kind of attempts, and you know, I'm originally from Czech Republic. We've been socialist country like basically after Second World War till 90s, and it didn't work out really. You know, like there was like lack of innovation, like lack of basically all resources in a sense, because like if you have the planning somewhere else than you actually executing it, like you don't know what the people need and what they can do, just like too far away from it. So I really like how you are thinking about being more transparent, the information flow we mentioned, like, you know, going from people to the government, from governments to people, basically in the real time, and also maybe make it more contained, like on the smaller levels. So on that kind of note, do you think like network states itself will be like network of states, in a sense, like, you know, like small pockets of people, which is like have some maximum limit of a growth, and then there will be basically another spin-off of the network state because they reach that limit? Or do you think those network states can kind of grow like basically till like the whole globe will be part of one network state?
That's a great question. I love thinking about that. And I think it's a function of just like how long is your timeline. My feeling is that it's best to always have competitive states. It's best to have more than one. I'm very against the idea of like a one world government, right? And so I think if you wound up with a one network state in 200 years or something, that'd probably wind up being a disaster. And so I think probably people's preferences are somewhat innate, right? Like a conservative really does want more individualism and the ability to control their own destiny or whatever. And a progressive really does want to be part of a system that is more focused on supporting people who, you know, don't have the same privilege or whatever their terms are, you know, of other people. They want to live in different kinds of systems. So I think because people innately want to live in different kind of systems, you will have diverse systems. The key is you just want them to compete with each other. I think your other question, or the way you began it, where there's an efficiency where if you're closest to the problem and the people who are informing the problem and the solution to the problem are closest to the problem, that is fundamentally a much more like information dense and better environment than people far away trying to solve a problem that they don't have. And this is the bureaucratic state, that they don't feel, that they don't have contact with the problem. The U.S. education system. One interesting example is the U.S. Department of Education wasn't formed until something like the 70s. Yeah, but the U.S. Our educational system was the best in the world far before that, and when it was more localized. And then ever since we've started the Department of Education at a federal level, our standing in the world in terms of our competitiveness of education has been in steady decline. So when decisions but this is something progressives don't understand when they endorse this kind of thing. It's like, we're going to give it more resources, more planning, more experts thinking of best practices and imposing best practices. Like, how is that not a great thing? Like, people from Harvard are going to tell everybody how to do things, especially those, people who are, don't know any better out in the South or whatever. So that's their plan. But then empirically, it makes everybody perform worse. It brings down the average a lot, right? And so whether we'll get around that with technology, whether we'll have, AI or some form of information gathering and sense making can get us past that, that's something we could speculate on. But for now, the way things work, you want problems solved locally. And so I think network states will probably be constrained by that. And that's a good thing. Like, you want this kind of thing done locally because it's much more efficient, right? The United States, as it has become, there's that whole WTF happened in 1971, right? You guys have probably been to that website. It's a huge thing in the Bitcoin community. In 1971, when we got off the gold standard, the amount of debt the country has gone in has just like gone, parabolic basically, but also the functioning of the institutions has gone down. Like, so many things perform worse. So when you're printing more money and you become more wasteful, you perform worse. You don't have more. You actually wind up eroding those institutions, right? That needed to be efficient first. And so I think there is some law there of efficiency and size and constraint that network states will be, beholden to or whatever. And that's a good thing. That'll allow for more customization and, participation. It's probably better to be part of a smaller system. It's hard, 300 million people to govern 300 million people in the United States. It's not efficient. You don't want very many institutions feeling that level of responsibility. Like Switzerland, just to put one other thing on it, Switzerland, has the canton system, and so much of the government is happening at the level of the city, basically, size-wise. Like, I think the vast majority of the services are provided from the canton, not the state, not the federal state, from the canton. And I think that if you look at Switzerland, it's provided so much more prosperity to the different cities. Like, all these cities in Switzerland are very prosperous and beautiful. And it's no surprise that because so much of the tax dollars are winding up in these little capitals. It's little capitals everywhere, and where they're distributing the money from. And so I think it probably leads to better efficiency and certainly better prosperity. And that's probably a model we want to be looking at when we're thinking about network states.
And what about the democratic aspect of this, Matt? Right. So you're building these new, almost by definition, I would say autonomous states, in the sense that they have their own place in the world system. They will have their citizens. Those people will have some type of citizenship. I know the network state of Praxis has been giving out these beautiful visas, what they call their visas. I have one here at home. Those citizens with their visas and their identity within those states, are there any promises towards them of how they can participate? And what constitutes good governance in those states?
Yeah, this is a great question. I don't think anybody knows yet. I think we only know, how would I put it? Well, if we step all the way back, like Balaji in his book says a network state would have a founder. That's his view, right? He sees it almost like as a startup model, which is not democratic, right? Let's just put it out there. Like, that's not a democratic model. And he also doesn't talk about governance. And my belief is he's going to add a lot more to the canon of his network state theory. Like, he is working on more material, and it'll come out, and perhaps governance will be handled there, but it's not handled yet. That's not something he's taken on. So as far as like the main theory, governance has not really been handled. I think what you're going to wind up with is there's a raw efficiency from having a founder and from following a sort of a corporate model. And in Balaji's vision, network states may follow that. In my experience in the network state system, which granted is like very colored by the fact that I'm American and I spend, at least 50% of my time with American-based network state people. And we're very like independent minded, right? So we're going to have our own opinions on that kind of thing. My guess is a lot of independent people want to live in jurisdictions where they have a say about the way things are governed. So even if you have a founder, that founder would create some kind of a consultation system where, because democracy isn't just people choosing their own destiny, ideally, it's also a collective intelligence system. It's also like what does everybody think? I don't know, maybe the truth is somewhere kind of in the middle. Maybe it's the average, right? Like it's believing that if you get a bunch of feedback on a thing, your decision will be way better. And so I think that any competitive network state will almost definitely have some kind of a really advanced consultative system to be like, what does everybody think? And it doesn't have, like in a democracy, that's binding, right? It's just like what everybody thinks goes. If you had like a founder, they don't have to do that. They don't have to say what everybody thinks goes, but they could actually in some sort of a funny model, they could say, well, I make the final decision, but they'll have a very competitive consultative model. So everybody in the society, maybe it's open source. Let's say that like a founder has an open source consultative system, which is really high fidelity, like really high detail. And it's got really, really good systems. So you can really understand what the society wants. What does society want? What are their problems? What do they think the solutions would be? What do the experts think? Who's behind it? And there's probably a really clever way of doing that without it being very burdensome. And so from a collective intelligence standpoint, that could be, you could do it in a way which is very intelligent, right? It's just like, this is really like a good view of what this society of 1 million people thinks. And then you could have a founder or, some kind of like a founding team or whatever choosing like, okay, well, this is what we're going to go with. You could actually almost imagine that out competing as quote unquote democracy like we have now in the United States that's just run on awful systems that just doesn't have any level of detail. Like supposedly it's a democracy, supposedly it's binding, or it's a republic or whatever we select our representatives. But the system of selecting representatives is so bad. And the parties are so bad, and everybody knows it. Like that's not my opinion. That's go to Pew polls or any of the polling systems, and nobody likes the parties anymore. There's more independents than members of either party, and faith and trust in these parties is awful. So you can have a democracy with just like these terrible systems that barely work. And so I guess that's my answer to you. I think that it's not necessarily just a pure thing like one system versus another system. It's how well functioning are the consultative systems? How well are you gathering collective intelligence? Do the people have faith in those systems? I think network states are going to nail that. And I don't think that we know yet, like, is it a pure democracy? Is it a representative democracy, a republic? A founder that just chooses by fiat, but with tremendous information and some sort of credible accountability system. I don't know.
So within that, and a great answer, by the way, within that search, right, the search that you're on to build these governance frameworks, right, and it almost sounds like there's an opportunity for people to step in and kind of suggest ways of working there. What about the concept of trust, right? So would network states aim to build high trust societies? Because you would contrast that to one of the concepts which is so big in crypto, which is trustless, right? We can do anything without needing to trust an actual human because these processes are automatic, et cetera, right? So how can you reconcile these things? The trust you need to build a functioning society, perhaps, and the trustlessness of the almost perfect libertarian life, owning your BTC and your guns and your property and not trusting anyone.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to make a lot of jokes about like the typical libertarian with their guns, but I'm going to pass on that.
Please.
Yeah, I think that, in fact, it's a misnomer when we say, trustless, because you are trusting the blockchain. That's what you're trusting. Like you're trusting BTC, you know? And so, yeah, if you're like a Bitcoiner, you're trusting Bitcoin. You're not trusting the person on the other side of the transaction, but you are trusting Bitcoin. So the whole trustless thing isn't true. Trust is really important. Trust is extremely important. If you have a low trust society, it's like a low motivation society. It's a low vision society because you don't imagine like everything that you need in order to create something beautiful and lasting and important requires so much trust and so much coherence in society. Like arguably that's one of the things that's very competitive about the US is like it's just our legal system. It's just a fairly predictable and highly functioning legal system with not that much corruption and nepotism and all these different things that are so much more common elsewhere. And so through just having that, you can build much greater, more complex things. And that's trust, right? And so I think these societies, 100% you're going to need to trust them. The big thing is what do you put your trust in, right? Like I'm a Bitcoiner, you know, Bitcoin is so simple. And certain people, that's what they love about it. Other people call it a pet rock and like a boomer coin. But other people, you know, like myself, were like, no, I love it because I can trust it because I can actually wrap my mind around it and it can handle the pressure of the world reserve currency status, right? Excuse me, it can handle that pressure because of its simplicity. It's not going to have unforeseen consequences, probably. You know, it's less likely than something more experimental. And so I would just say this opportunity of exploring these institutions through network states is an opportunity of reflecting on what do we trust? You know, nobody trusts the media. Like what happens when nobody trusts the mainstream media like we do in the United States, and then you know these people are trying to make decisions. Well, here's what happens: their trust in all these other institutions declines. When your trust in the media declines, your trust in the government declines. Your trust in religion and all these different other things will decline in general because that trust is evaporating from your environment, right? And so you need to reflect on what you trust and then build your life again on things that you trust. And that's kind of like a fourth turning, first turning thing is these institutions, you have to stop trusting them because they are not actually representing reality faithfully to you anymore. They have other agendas at the end of their life cycle. And so people are, it's actually in a funny way, a very healthy response to stop trusting them. But then now we need to find something new to trust in because you can't build societies without trust. You need to be able to trust these systems. So now it's about finding those new things.
Nice, man. So I might want to steer the discussion a little bit towards like the DAOs actually, because we also do the DAO course. You are one of the students of our first How to DAO course, but you are also the organizer, so you have like multiple hats right there. Maybe let's start with the simple question, like what's the difference between or similarities between network states and DAOs, because both are kind of trusting the blockchain, but one is called network state and one is called DAO. So where is the difference?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll preface this by saying that like I actually legitimately don't understand DAOs. That's partially why I'm excited for the DAO course, is because as a Bitcoiner, it's been a blind spot for me, but something that I've always acknowledged has some of the most exciting experimentation in the entire crypto space is happening in DAOs, right? And so from what I've learned from you guys so far, we're halfway through the course. One of the biggest differences is the scope of what you're trying to do. So a DAO can have a very fixed scope of what they're trying to do. You know, it could be scientific innovation, or it could be, funding certain things, or funding public goods, or whatever, like they do at Gitcoin. And I would say, a network state is going to almost always be oriented towards greater sovereignty and things, and so I think there's a more global aspect to the network state. I think DAOs are a great primitive for network states. Like we're going to want to learn from what DAOs are doing, and I think a lot of DAOs could transform into network states also if they wanted to, but they would probably want to increase their the scope of what they're going for, and all that's really good, right? Because our tools of coordination are still pretty limited at this point. And so we want to work on small problems before we work on big problems. And so DAOs are doing the really important work of working on these smaller problems, and inventing tools for doing that. And we'll continue to learn as an ecosystem from them. And I think the network state ecosystem is largely dependent on what the DAO ecosystem comes up with in terms of governance and decision making and stuff.
Yeah. So if I
Until
understand,
go ahead.
yeah. So if I understand correctly, the answer basically are saying like DAOs are this like organizations such as like kind of like a companies which are very focused on one particular product, service, uh, something. But the network states are more about the people which are coming together but building multiple things, and they are like kind of like a nation states. Like the fact that I live in United States right now doesn't mean that we are focused on like one product. Like United States, building many things. So I think it makes sense from my perspective as well. So like now we are the DAOs, and like we launched this first course with Network State Connect, and Network State Connect mission. It's and like I think you will have better answer than I, but it's like the find actually your network states. Like you want to like kind of like help to navigate people from outside of network states into some network states so they can find their place. And how we are kind of starting, what we are starting with, it's education. So actually educate about those primitives. Like, is there like what's the overall goal? How you're seeing this kind of be evolving as a platform, as an organization? Is Network State Connect becoming Network State itself, or like what's the bigger vision there?
Yeah, Network State Connect does not aspire to become a network state. We want to help network states, and we want to help people find network states. And so if we're correct that this is like a societal evolution into a new form of institutions, a lot of people are going to want to get involved in that. There's benefit to you just from a curiosity standpoint. Like the people who invented Bitcoin, they didn't think they were creating a multi-trillion-dollar asset. Some of them might have thought of it in their wildest dreams, but in reality, they were just working on a problem that they wanted to solve, a computer science problem and an economic problem. And so they were just focused on it, and they loved that as hobbyists. And so I think this takes some of that energy on an institutional level. Like, how do we solve some of these problems in terms of coordination, in terms of, institution creation? So you have the hobbyist level, but then you also have the being oriented towards the future is very good for you also, right? I think, a group of Bitcoiners, I use that as an example always because that's my community, so I can speak from it. But a group of Bitcoiners are going to react very differently than a group of people that doesn't contain a lot of Bitcoiners to certain things like economic threats, or how do you feel about fiat? Or let's say, if you're concerned about your own government, if your government might harm you, if you're a bunch of Bitcoiners, you have this option, you have this sovereignty where you're like, I can take my money and go. I know I can, and they're not going to stop me. They can't stop me. Whereas if you're a fiat person, you're not in that position at all. You're like, I need permission. If I get out of here, they're going to, freeze my account. And that's just with money, but you can do that with, all of your accounts online, and, what kind of services you're using. You can be unpersoned. Your entire community can be canceled from these different things. So there's this thing where if you orient yourself, if you get good at these things, you orient yourself towards your institutions in a way which is more sophisticated. And so we want to help people who are interested in this concept of being part of the cutting edge, because it can benefit them, because it can give them more sovereignty, because it's the frontier. It's actually the institutional frontier. It's very exciting. We want to bring them in and show them the different options of network states that exist to them that they can join, and the different sort of values they represent, because there's really a lot of different values in that ecosystem that you can find. And then as part of that, like as the connective tissue between the incoming people and the finding of the network states, is education. So we want to educate people and provide value to our network state partners, not just because we're helping people find them, but because we're actually getting them people who understand these primitive. They understand, governance through DAOs. They understand financial sovereignty in Bitcoin. They understand, maybe health sovereignty. That's a big thing that we try and teach as well. Is like actually understanding your own health data so that you're not completely dependent on some other institution to tell you whether you're healthy or not. That's kind of insane, and especially if they're not even trustworthy. Because now it's not insane in the past when you didn't have access to the data, but now that you do and you can analyze it yourself, you want it that can be disintermediated, and you can understand for yourself how you're doing. And so people who have that capacity will be better suited members of network states, because they're going to have that kind of sovereignty and that kind of independent mindedness going in, and it's kind of like network states that are populated with people like that it's going to be much easier for them to collaborate than, we run a local network state meetup, for example. And if somebody shows up and they're like, what's Bitcoin? How does that work? What's Ethereum? I've heard of Ethereum. It's just kind of like, okay, well, you know how much upskilling you need in order to even have a conversation about what we're doing. And so we're trying to like fast forward past that part. So yeah, helping people come in and understand what the network state is, gaining new skills, joining network states. That's what Network State Connect is hoping to do.
Nice.
Awesome.
And like I will maybe make one shill here, because like we are just finishing our first cohort, which I hope you enjoy, Matt. And we had a couple guests before who had like a good feedback about it. So if you are interested in the next cohort, which will be starting in March, I will be posting the form, and it's also on the How to DAO book Twitter account. So you can check at How to DAO book, and you can sign up, or you can apply for the cohort number 2, which will be starting in March. And one last question from my side, and then Gideon, I'll let you finally ask yours. There are more courses you are launching on your platform outside the How to DAO. So when they are coming, what they are about?
We have a writers cohort starting at the end of January. So that's where we write about, we kind of exercise our content production skills, like as essayists, and then also on Twitter and stuff like that, like promoting and liking each other's work and stuff like that. So we play with those things and write on the theme of, I would almost say like accelerationism or techno optimism, to use, I think Mark Andreessen did like a popular post on techno optimist manifesto or whatever. I think that more or less captures our values, that we can lean into technology and create much better outcomes, and really, especially if we do lean into technology rather than like leaving it up to other people. So we explore just like the kaleidoscopic different things, around that subject. And so that writers cohort begins at the end of January, with some people from Network School are going to be writing also about their experience from Network School, which is pretty exciting. And we have some other ones in the hopper around like digital community building, basically. I don't want to announce it yet because it hasn't been fully signed off, but there's a really, really exciting community who has created like a big online presence that turned into an in-person presence, and now that plays really well back and forth. So like learning those dynamics, which is like a really core skill, as well as building online community and then having it translate into offline community. And then a financial sovereignty course on Bitcoin that'll come out in Q1. So just like understanding that the foundational concepts around that. So those are some things. We also have other pillars that we're going to be exploring this year, stuff around health sovereignty, as I mentioned, stuff around localism, because one of the things about the network state that's really important is you don't want to try and manifest everything completely online. It's actually really important for you to have a good network of trusted individuals locally, where you can experiment with some of these things, and you can get a lot of the like positive like social feedback of a physical group. So some of the stuff you do in network states you want to do online because it's global and that's really exciting, and some you actually want to do locally because that benefits you personally so much. And so we're going to be talking about that, and then AI and a few other things. So if you go to nsconnect.xyz, that's where these things are going to be announced, and you can join our Discord, and that's also where all these things are going to be discussed as they come out. But yeah, thank you, Punkar, for asking that question. And we're just thrilled, I'll say, for both of you, Gideon and Punkar, to be doing our first course. The DAO course is fantastic. And learning about governance from you guys who are qualified to do it and passionate educators has just been fantastic, man. I love it. And I'm excited for the next one.
Awesome, Matt. Yeah, it really sounds like you're building a new type of citizenry here almost, right? So including even the skills of agitation, right? How do we tell the story? Um, Now, I'm curious, right? Because you are part of this course. Over the weeks, you've seen this group of people kind of explore the concept of DAOs, these decentralized autonomous organizations. Yeah, and I'm curious what your observations are about these participants, right? So, are they indeed the new type of citizenry that is now being prepared for participating in these network states? Is there a common characteristic you can see? Yeah, just curious there.
I think very much. Like, I'm really excited. We have an organization there where they're coming in and they're using it as a way of level setting and being able to make decisions together. So that's MeDAO. Adam was here, I think, on the podcast recently, so I think that is like a great example of people coming together and getting on the same page, right? Like using these tools at the frontier and getting on the same page with people. So like, I know I would be excited to do that. And in fact, maybe we'll just bring the Network State Connect team on for the next DAO course and just like all get on the same, right? And I think that all of the DAO course, who I've mentioned to you guys before too, but she's just got this fantastic story of, she lives in Buenos Aires right now, which is one of the most exciting places in the world governance wise, because Javier Milei is getting ready to, or is in the process of libertarianizing that country, which has, experienced so much inflation, so many economic problems. And not only that, but she got there from Venezuela, where she lived before, which is like the biggest economic catastrophe in the hemisphere. And that's where she learned about Ethereum and started a big Ethereum group there. And so one of the things that draws me to the network state most of all is learning firsthand from people who have real life experiences in these different jurisdictions, especially the ones that you don't hear from, like Venezuela, or China. When I'm talking to a Chinese national, it's absolutely fascinating to hear about their stories. And most of my friends don't have the opportunity to do that. And so I think who we have in the course is exactly who I would envision for this kind of thing. Now, I would caveat that by saying they do have different values, so they will eventually start different kinds of network states, right? I think they will exist in these different jurisdictions, but I think overall, like trying to innovate and create new forms of institutions, these are the kind of people I would want to do that with.
So we are kind of on the time now, but one last question to you, Matt. Is there something you would like to say which we did not ask you?
No, it was great.
Oh, perfect. That means that I will do another promotion here. So what you learn here on this live stream, or if you're watching it from the recording, is like you should learn about network states and DAOs because that's the frontier, and it's always good to be up to date with what is coming. How you learn about DAOs? Two main ways. Go to howtodao.xyz and buy a book about DAOs called How to DAO, and sign up for the course, which is starting in March. How to learn about network states? Go to networkstate.com or ns.com should get you there as well, which is a website from Balaji, and there is a book about network state. And if you want to find the right network states for you, then you should go to NS Connect. Is it .xyz, Matt?
Yeah, .xyz.
.xyz, and you can find your way through there to our course, to another network state, other courses. So, that's what you should do right now.
Yeah, and join the Discord server when you get on the website. That's the key way right now because it's early, and so the information that's coming out will be, a lot of it's through the server, and you'll meet some other fun people. So that's also on nsconnect.xyz.
And you can find Gideon on LinkedIn because he's a boomer.
He's a pro. He's a pro on LinkedIn. He uses LinkedIn better than anybody I know.
I see a lot of reactions coming in. So
There we go.
just
Yeah.
fine.
Nice. Thank you guys. This was an amazing discussion. I know we could be going for an hour, but we had just 60 minutes. It was great. So thank you for coming, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank both of you guys. Thank you for the great course you're doing. I'm excited for the next one. This has been great.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Bye.